I mean,
Let me leave you alone.
Okay. Does anyone have any questions first before we introduce some things to talk about?
Nick, the overview. Last week we were talking about whether or not darkness is real, and we were talking about we're coming to the realization that we were not created to be human. We were actually created to be Adam, and we had a choice between being human and being Elohim as an Adam. So, and we chose to be human, and what we it kind of morphed into how do we get beyond being in this human state. And I think if there are not questions concerning that, then we move into the area of the how-to, more or less. Okay?
Yep. So, yeah, where I wanted to pick up this week was from my own perspective, and anyone else who has a similar experience, try to give you some idea or some explanation of how to actually go about doing this. So what we're talking about is our ability to recognize what's going on in us internally, and then choose a particular response to what we are presented with in terms of our conscious experience. So last week I mentioned that the Gospel of Thomas was one of the books that was more focused on the how-to and more focused on the actual inner understanding of things that appear to be more superficial in the books, or at least that we've been taught are fairly superficial. So one of the reasons that this book, or any of the other books that were included or that exist that talk about the teachings that come from this time period, were suppressed, not included in the original text, was because the people who made up the exterior church did not have the complete understanding of what the purpose of the church was. So they sought to build an institution rather than to transmit the knowledge that had been the foundation for it all along. So that stuff still is around, thank goodness, and it has it's sometimes very, very different from what we're used to hearing. And I have a few things, or a few specific things that I want to take out of it. But otherwise, I'm going to try to speak from my own experience so it makes hopefully a little bit more sense. So what I wanted to introduce with the whole how-to was how to actually recognize an opportunity to use something that is presented to your conscious awareness for the purpose of transforming who and what you are, or rather transforming your awareness of who and what you are. So last week I mentioned alchemy and what alchemy is. And as I said last week, alchemy is really the science of transforming you. And it became sort of a more physical science sort of later on in history. But originally it comes from Egypt, essentially, and even before that. But the word alchemy itself means coming from or of Egypt. So it's really referring to the science of Egypt. And the science of Egypt is a subjective science. So it's a science, it's the actual how-to of self-transformation. And I think getting into something like this represents like a big shift, or will represent a big shift in our attitude, and in general, in terms of what we think of as our responsibilities here in this experience. Because really the responsibility is totally on us. And that doesn't mean that we don't receive help if we really, really need it, but it means that you will only receive enough help, or as much help as you need, and no more. It means that our attitudes concerning where the Creator is in all of this.
Nick, I have a question.
Yeah.
Receiving no more help than is needed and no more. Who determines that?
Us,
Okay.
of course. And we determine that by a number of reasons. The main one being whether or not we ask for it. But the reason I said that is if we receive, well, the explanation behind why I said that is if we request more help than we need, we are actually impeding our own process of development. And if we don't get it, whatever we perceive that help to be, we tend to get a little bit frustrated. But the reason we don't get it is because if we did, it would be worse. Whether or not we understand that at the moment. So I was talking about an attitude shift that we have to have in terms of where we think, or where we perceive, or where we feel the Creator is in this experience. And what that means is, even after being in here for a while, we still have, and in general as well, we still have some idea that the Creator is out there, outside of us somewhere. And we are seeking to find it and bring it into us. The truth of the matter is that it's both. It is both outside and inside, but the inside is more important because that's how you get to what you perceive to be on the outside. And the inner truth of all that is that there is no outside at all. But basically what I'm saying is that we have to reverse our thinking and change our attitude. What we're looking for is in us, it is us. And it is here right now. It's just a matter of us not being able to interface properly with it. Because of our own ignorance, because of our own lack of understanding in terms of where to go or how to. But does that make sense?
Yes.
Yes.
I do have a question though.
Yeah.
I'm curious about the context, putting alchemy in the context from what we discussed back in December about, I guess, the process of devolving and who we were in Egypt and the kind of knowledge, spiritual knowledge that we had in Egypt. How does alchemy fit into that in terms of transforming yourself?
It fits into it because that's exactly what alchemy actually is in terms of spiritual development. And even though it became, or people attempted to make it a physical science, and some were more successful than others, even in the Egyptian and before that, understanding of what that process was, it was focused on the internal as opposed to the external. So does that answer your question, or is there something
I think so. I guess
else you're getting at?
I'm wondering if that was part of our attempt to kind of stop the process of becoming even more detached from who we originally were, or if we were how that came about.
I see. Absolutely, it was.
Okay.
So in the beginning, we just operated out of an innate connection that we all had, that we all knew we had, and over time, as we became more attached to that, we had to find ways to slow that process of degradation, and to reverse it. And what became known as alchemy was that.
Okay.
It was not necessarily the creating of institutions around this whole process, but it was the more formalized practice of coming together as a group to understand who and what you are.
But it was not, the degradation at that point was not a conscious move, the stopping of the degradation rather, was not conscious. But we are more attached to the material, and that's why we began to use alchemy to enhance the physical in terms of wealth, lead to gold, etc., as opposed to human to the Adam or to Elohim. Because our desire was more material than spiritual. Or is, I should say.
Yeah. So the whole thing with lead into gold is always about transforming one quote-unquote lower state into a quote-unquote higher state, or transforming this material, physical awareness, and only the physical material awareness, back into a more open, divine awareness that is able to perceive what is beyond this experience.
Now, lead is not a good conductor, is it?
No.
And gold is a superconductor, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Gold has the least electrical resistance of any metal.
Right.
So if we're talking about, I mean, that makes perfect sense in terms of reflecting what you just said about, transforming ourselves, like from one thing that's very poorly connected, if connected at all, into something that has the least amount of resistance, I guess, to being connected.
And the idea that lead kills and gold doesn't.
Yeah.
So when you said that about the conductivity of gold, it's something dawned on me that we are always trying to become who we were created to be on our own terms. For example, the technology even that we're using now, it's an effort to become God-like as opposed to God in the physical, because I truly believe that the microprocessors don't work because they're supposed to work. I think they work because we desire them to work. You see what I'm talking about? We desire to have something that substitutes for who we are, and that's why it actually functions the way it does, not because it was designed that we did that. Does that make sense?
Absolutely, and I'm glad you brought that up, because for some reason I sort of added to the end of what I wanted to talk about, a discussion of what Lucifer is.
Yeah.
And that's related to technology.
Right.
But what was I saying? So the transformation of lead into gold is a transformation of you originally, and over time it became more physical in terms of practice. So gold has the least electrical resistance. In other words, the energy flows freely through it, more so than any other metal. So in terms of us, what that's saying is part of the way in which we transform ourselves is to allow what is in us to flow properly and offer it no resistance, or to remove the resistance from the flow that is coming from our source of our awareness and of our being and of who and what we are. And that's one of the things that has been most helpful to me in particular, is recognizing opportunities to do that. And I hope to give you a couple of examples, but what we're trying to do is remove the blockages that prevent light from being able to bring back to order who and what we are on an internal and material physical level. Because the material and physical is no different than spirit is that. It just is a particular experience of it, or a particular structuring of it. So when we open ourselves up to flow more freely, then not only do we bring our own internal structure back to order, that in turn radiates out into the physical and affects our physical bodies first. So all of this is related to the very purpose for which we are in this physical experience. And that is to master our abilities and know who and what we are. So this whole alchemy process is related to the very purpose for which we came into this experience in the first place, or chose to come into this experience in the first place. So does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. If that's the case, then, and the goal is to master our abilities, so that we become who and what we were created to be, then this physical, anything that's in this physical thing, one of the ways that we put obstructions in the way is to respond by saying, why me kind of stuff, or why is this happening to me kind of stuff, instead of just being open to what is presented and not putting our own mind barriers in the way. I don't know if that, mind is not the right word, but
no, that's perfect. And the actual science of how to not put those barriers in the way, and in fact, remove those barriers that we recognize are there, is the root of what alchemy is.
I think mind is the perfect example, because mind itself is a barrier. When we look at mind being represented or being the same thing as, I should say, maybe dark energy, which is lack of understanding, or lack of confusion, or lack of desire to understand, which in itself is a barrier. So the whole idea of mind is indeed a barrier.
So one of the things I wanted to add was that, in particular, and I'm pretty sure it was widespread, I don't know if it was any one particular that said it first, but Native Americans saw the desire for gold as something that's extremely destructive. And the spiritual root of their understanding of what that whole process was, or what that whole desire was the understanding that human beings' thought processes and desires can become so focused on the material that rather than seeking what was inside them and what actually is, they, out of their unconsciousness of who and what they were, sought sort of that same thing, but the physical, material versions of it. And that comes with all the ignorance and all the destructive tendencies that go with being ignorant of the rest of reality. So it's crazy. I think I wrote something on my blog like months ago how it's insane that our economy is based on gold in the first place, even though, I mean, it may or may not be at this point in history, but at some point in history, somebody went through all this effort to obtain some yellow metal, literally because they liked the way it looked. That's it. There's no practical purpose for it. Now, people may have been aware of other properties that it had out of their own spiritual understanding, whether that was a conscious one or an unconscious one. But we like the way it looks, and we like the way it looks because we like light and the way light plays off of it. And that is a sort of more physical example of what we are actually attracted to, which is light and the source of light on an internal spiritual level.
Well, isn't that what we do anyway? The physical mirrors the spiritual. Only it's the opposite extreme. We think gold is important because we place the value on it in our system, and because of how it looks and how it sparkles. But the hidden underlying reason is that in us is something that seeks that quote unquote gold from the spiritual perspective. So it's really a counterfeit of a spiritual reality, in a sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And you said when we place value on it, you can sort of see.
Whoops, you're going.
Where you going? We don't hear you. We can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Wow.
Sorry, that was my microphone. I was saying, and you can kind of see at what point where you said that we place value on it. So what we understood to be valuable shifts, or what some people's understanding of what is valuable shifts from things that have more to do with reality and spirituality onto things that are imitations of that, or still connected to it, but our attention is not directed at what is real. It's directed to or at a imitation or counterfeit, as you said.
I think that's what Barbara said connects to the journey that we're on. When it talks about the streets of heaven, or the journey that leads to enlightenment is paved with gold, that in itself is speaking to the higher self, as opposed to what we talked about earlier, the lead and the lower self. So there is an innate connection between spirituality or enlightenment and this thing that we see as gold.
Absolutely. And the same could be said for, well, let me just say everywhere you see in the Old Testament where they're saying to build things out of gold and sprinkle the blood on the different parts of it. All that is the science of how you use light or awareness in you to bring about a certain experience. So there's a reason that the word gold, which is abbreviated AU on the periodic table, but there's the reason that the word gold in like all the Latin languages or all the Romance languages is related to the word light, because that's what it is. But anyway, so what I'm interested in and what I hope to be able to do is to give you an idea of how to actually use whatever is presented to your conscious experience as a catalyst or as a springboard to propel you further in terms of your own understanding of self and your own ability to draw further from the source that you are connected to. So one of the, I'll try to put something else on the screen in a second. So what I've done is just pull out a couple of things from the Gospel of Thomas that I felt were appropriate. I'll just get them up on the screen. Okay. But the reason that I wanted to use it is because the language and the wording in this book is more immediate, and it speaks more so to our responsibility, more openly, I would say, than the four stories that are considered canon, anyway. So I always thought it was weird that in the New Testament that everybody normally reads, that we only have 4 books and they're all the same thing.
Yeah.
That's kind of strange. So let me see if I can share this. Here we go. Let me know if you can. It should pop up in a second. Everybody see that?
Not yet.
Not yet.
Just you.
Okay.
There it is.
All right.
So his disciples said to him, "When will the kingdom come?" And Jesus said, "It will not come by waiting for it. It will not be a matter of saying, 'Here it is,' or 'There it is.' Rather, the kingdom of the Father is spread out upon the earth, and men do not see it."
You know which saying that is?
Oh, shoot.
I'm just curious. I don't want to stop you.
No, that's okay. I was stepping in.
I mean, what verse
What's
was it?
saying in Thomas?
Yeah. It's,
113.
Okay, thanks.
that's one of the 3 or 4 most.
Isn't that what
quoted.
you said last week?
Huh?
Messianic consciousness
Yes,
hasn't come because we're sitting around waiting for it?
right.
And that speaks to the responsibility I was talking about earlier, in that our whole attitude has to shift in terms of where we think we're supposed to go, so to speak, in order to get what it is that we're after. And the answer is, it's not that we have to go anywhere external, it's that we have to learn how to allow our source to flow more freely through us, so that it can produce the changes that we are looking for, that we think are on the outside of us somewhere.
So when it says, Nick, it's spread across the earth, which relates to our consciousness, then it's already in us. It already is. We are it and it is us. Is that what that's saying?
Yes.
That we don't see it with our internal spiritual eye, but we tend to put a physical interpretation on it being out there somewhere waiting for us.
Yes, or not even that it's necessarily physical, and I definitely agree with what you said, but it also speaks to the attitude that we have.
And when we talk about looking for it out there, it's because we see Earth as being out there. And when you look at what Thomas is saying, Aramaically speaking, when he talk, upon can also mean in. And Earth is Earth consciousness. So it's talking about the whole concept of the kingdom being involved or in the midst of Earth consciousness. It's a matter of finding it. When we understand that the consciousness itself is dark energy or misunderstanding or the lack of understanding, So when we began to understand what light is and this journey that we're on, it is at that point that we can begin to realize that the kingdom is indeed in this earth consciousness. So there's nothing is separate.
So all of this is built on the basic fundamental Aramaic perspective of that the internal is the external,
That's it.
is the internal, is the external. They're one and the same.
Right. See, from the Aramaic, there's nothing upon. Everything is in, out, and the same. There's nothing upon anything. Because upon is indicative of separation.
And
Yeah.
also related to that, what you just said, Barbara, the internal is the external is the internal. That is the saying, what as above, so below.
Yeah.
And as below, so above. Which is another alchemical saying that is included in the original, things that were written down about the process of alchemy. So there's actually, I have them with me. Maybe we can get into them a bit later after I go back and look at them, but in Egypt, and I don't exactly know how old they are. They're probably far older than what we've been officially told or what we can officially see. But there's a list, I believe it's, all right, let me just get it. Let's see.
The one place in the room he forgot the rest.
Nobody would make.
It's from the something called the Emerald Tablets,
Wow.
and all kinds of people throughout history looked at this in an attempt to understand what it could apply to, including people like Isaac Newton and many others. But it's basically, and before I really introduce it, I guess I'll look at it some more, but it's basically the putting down the process of transforming yourself in this sense, spiritually. And that was the basis for alchemy, or the first time it was written, anyway. So, there's another thing that is written. Oh, first of all, is everybody okay? Does anybody have any questions or anything about what I just put up?
Remind me, the Book of Thomas, it's been a long time since I was paying attention to the history of the development of the books that were eventually canonized. Thomas wasn't part of Nag Hammadi. Thomas was around way before, but was one of the disputed books and kept out of the Bible, right? The Council of Nicaea, the whole thing, or am I mixing apples and oranges a
No,
bit?
you're not.
I thought it was part of the Nag Hammadi library.
It is.
Maybe I'm thinking of
Was
something
it?
else.
Okay.
It was part of the library, and it was one of the books that was excluded during the Nicene Conference as well.
Yeah, but the two don't take place at the same time.
No, they don't take place at the same time.
I mean, my point is that it's one thing if the church decided that this book was too radical, so they purposely called it whatever they needed to call it to discredit it. It's another thing that they made all those decisions more or less along the same kind of line and created the structure of the Catholic Church. But then Nag Hammadi was in, what, the 30s and 40s. So this came on the scene way after all of that.
Yeah, and what happened is that the Nag Hammadi came in the 30s and 40s, but some of those books were already in the possession of the Vatican.
So they were just copies.
Yeah, and there were
Yeah.
many,
They
many
missed one.
copies. Yeah. Huh?
I said they missed one.
So in actuality, the reason they were excluded, the popular theory is that with those books, you could not institutionalize
Right.
Christianity.
No, I understand the whole politics
Yeah, so-
involved, but I just forgot
Yeah.
whether or not it's accepted that Thomas was one of the scriptures, one of the writings that was debated and ultimately blackballed or whatever that
Right.
process was. After much blood and pain.
Yeah. So I got one more for you at the moment.
Interesting.
It should pop up in a couple of seconds.
Are we supposed to imagine, for example, that Emerald Tablets and Emerald City have anything to do with each other? Just out of fun, The Wizard of Oz, or is that getting a little too...
Oh, I'm glad you said that.
Uh-oh.
Think about that. Who the heck would come up with something like that?
Who are these people in Hollywood?
Exactly.
Well, that was the guy that wrote all those books.
There are people who are in
Well, it
touch
wasn't Hollywood.
with the creative side, with creativity. That's who they are. And the things that comes out of the light that they have,
Well, who
they
wrote
see it more in material terms than in spiritual. So we end up with movies. But that's what they
who
are.
wrote The Wizard of Oz? I mean, that's the person who...
Oh, I forget. But it's no coincidence that the other movie about Oz just came out.
Yeah.
I don't know if anyone's seen that. Anyway, is that thing up on screen?
Yeah.
Yeah.
The next verse? Okay.
And which one is that?
Oh. Hang it. I gotta do the same thing. Hang on.
It just helps
Should
me.
have thought about this earlier. 37.
What is that?
Verse 37?
The same.
Saying 37.
Saying 37. Sorry. Yeah. So Jesus said, when you unclothe yourselves and are not ashamed, and take your garments and lay them beneath your feet, like the little children, and trample on them, then you will see the Son of the Living One, and you will not be afraid. So I included this because this
You see yourself.
Yeah.
This is the alchemical process right here. And not just that, but also more than that. This is our task. This is, in some ways, condensed the whole purpose of the one that we call Jesus, anyway. So I wanted to look at it piece by piece.
Okay.
So his disciples ask, on what day will you be revealed to us? What day shall we see you? So, everybody, I think, has everybody here seen the movie Avatar? The one with the blue people?
Yeah.
And, in that movie they say, I see you, as they're greeting.
Yeah.
But they're not talking about, I see you physically.
Right.
They're saying, I see who you are. I understand that you are another me, that you are another spirit. So this is what the disciples are asking. So they're obviously staring at him. So they're not talking about it physically. So in other words, when will we be able to see and understand and experience the full reality of who and what you are? Because the reason that we were following you is because we know something with you is a little bit different. Although it's different, it's really just an amplified version of something that is in us. So, I like this so much because it gets to the real things that always make us uncomfortable. So, when he says, when you unclothe yourselves and are not ashamed, that's kind of the first part of his response. When you unclothe yourselves and are not ashamed.
That goes back to Genesis. They were naked and ashamed.
Yeah, and then they were clothed in skin.
Right.
Yep. I'm going to come back to my face really quick. But, so what, as you talk about when you say unclothe yourself, or whenever we hear the word garments, it's talking about something other than this physical stuff we're wearing. Although, as I should have mentioned earlier, the physical things that we interact with are themselves are symbols for spiritual properties or spiritual entities or concepts or thoughts, because they are the result of thoughts. So through the use of our own thought, we have created these symbols that reflect a inner need for something. And this is a little bit off topic for a second, but in the same way that when you dream, and in the dream you are presented with symbols that represent something in your experience or something deeper in your spiritual nature. In that same way, do these physical things represent the counterparts? Now,
Sorry. Oh, Lord.
Did you do it?
No.
Then don't apologize.
She was just sitting there.
She did.
I did not.
What were you thinking?
I don't know.
You did it telepathically.
Be quiet.
That's how you thought. Right.
Oh, let's see.
Hopefully he knows.
He's probably still talking.
No, he'll hear it when. No, that's. Raya didn't join us for some reason.
You lost me.
hello.
Sorry,
Okay.
folks.
Hello.
Okay,
Technical.
okay, show.
Yeah, I can hear you, Sheldon.
You're back.
Okay, great.
Technical difficulties. Where did you all lose me? Or where was I cut off?
When you're getting ready to talk about that all of these are symbols that represent some spiritual
Even when you dream.
Okay.
concept.
So what I said was that in the same way that the symbols that are presented to you in dreams are representative of an aspect of your experience, or something that you are going through spiritually that you may not even be consciously aware of. These physical things that are around us are physical symbols in the same way, just in a different realm of experience. It's more difficult to connect and interface with the meaning of something that is man-made, like this plastic pen that I use, simply because of the fact that it is made by our intellect, and not necessarily, it's not as connected to its source as it could be, or rather, it's not a fluid motion coming from the source that's producing it. So when you look at natural things, because those are responding directly to the influence of what is natural, it's easier to interface with and understand and know what those things represent in terms of the thoughts, the concepts, the spiritual energies, and the forces that went into creating it. And also the information that they transmit. So when you look at a tree, you can feel and know the history of that tree. Um, but anyway, is that? I hope I didn't throw anybody off. I was just using that as an example to talk about clothing or garments as symbols. So when he's talking about when he says when you unclothe yourselves and are not ashamed, as Pastor Richard said, that's related to Genesis when we were clothed in skin. When you strip off all these tacked on, unnecessary things that are the result of our own choices, and become once again more aware of who and what you are before these things get added to you. And once you do that, you are not afraid or ashamed to admit and be willing to have intercourse with who and what you actually are. That's the first step.
And so all these things that you talk about, all of it is based in our own thought. If I think I'm this or I think I'm that or whatever, that those things that I pile and create for myself through my own thinking, those are the kinds of things you're talking about. I gotta put aside or trample.
Yes.
Or
Right. You can think of it like when we're a little kid and somebody asks us, what do you want to be when you grow up? Most people, even then, begin to apply all these things to themselves that don't really have anything to do with who they actually are as a spiritual being or as a being, period. But they begin to constitute our idea of who and what we are.
yeah.
And our idea of who and what we are sets or imposes barriers and limits to what we can become in terms of our experience and in terms of change we're able to affect in ourselves and in the world. So when you unclothe yourself or take your garments off, it's like you're saying, all right, I got a family, I got a job, I got all that stuff, but that's not who I am. Does that make sense?
It does in that the idea of nakedness and being ashamed came when they were spiritual entities. It was before the being human. It was during the spiritual during the time of spirituality or spiritual existence, and losing sight of that spiritual existence or a desire to move away from it, however, I don't know how to term it, is what led to the whole concept of the garments of skin. Once the garments of skin are removed, which actions, attitudes and stuff, once they're removed, then you're back at that spiritual state where you were prior to the garment being clothed in garments, rather.
Well, this
Yep. Oh, yep.
this is making me think, we're back to the story of the Garden of Eden.
That's exactly, we never left.
Right. I mean, we're still rummaging around in there and trying to sort out why eating the fruit of one tree but don't touch the other one. And yet, had you understood the essence of the other one, then you'd have a basis of knowledge to know how to deal with the tree whose fruit you ate. Right? So in other words, if you know who you are, what difference does it make what you wear? It doesn't mean you can't look nice, but you don't build yourself based on that. It's just, you know what I mean? So, I mean, to me, it's all circling back to that. Am I wrong?
No, you're not wrong. But no, not wrong at all. It's just that when we're talking about how to, it seems like we always keep coming back to the same thing. It's because we don't understand that thing. Not yet. Or rather than simply gain more insight into it, but actually apply it, which is more difficult. So the attitudes that we hold in general have a certain momentum to them. They carry us in a certain direction in terms of what we experience. So part of this process is recognizing and understanding the attitudes that we have that keep us locked in a physical mode of existence. And keep us ignorant of who and what we actually are. So, let me go to the next part. When you unclothe yourselves and are unchained, and then the next thing is, and take your garments and lay them beneath your feet. Like the little children, and trample on them. So, those very same attitudes, those very same ideas, those very same tendencies that we have that essentially are holding us back. Once we recognize that they're there, we have to totally put them behind us, or beneath us, or totally get rid of them. So this verse also relates to, unless you have the mind of a child, you will not enter the kingdom. Children are always used because they are not as far along as we are in terms of accumulating all this stuff that we drape on the outside of us and cover ourselves with. So when we take it off and we recognize those attitudes and thoughts that are actually preventing us from being able to interface more directly with who and what we actually are and our source, then we put them behind us completely. And when you begin to do that, you can begin to experience and understand the freedom that comes with not being afraid of stripping away all the things that we use to define who and what we are, that make us comfortable. So it has more so to do with allowing your identity to really be itself, as opposed to how we have chosen or attempted to define our identity. And for most people, this is everybody, this is a very frightening process. It's similar to a psychological breakdown in that everything you know just seems to be like crumbling. Only the difference is, if you're connected more so to your source, then it's crumbling allows you to be free rather than destroys you. And it's something that we sort of do, we're actively participating with. Sheldon?
Oh, yes, I wanted to say in regard to the clothing thing, the garments. If you kind of think of it in a sense, and I'm not encouraging anyone to walk around and do this, but with our clothing, what we wear, it actually allows. Can everyone hear me?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Clothing allows us to do several things. It allows us to hide parts or aspects of ourselves that we don't feel comfortable with or we don't want to accept. Garments also allow us, as far as the things that Nick was talking about, stripping down, to almost make ourselves over in a way of our choosing, which also helps us to hide different parts of ourselves from one another, so to speak. It's as if you can make yourself over. Can you still hear me? Because I don't see anyone moving that foundation.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Oh, okay. your,
Yeah, not seeing anybody moving either.
yeah.
Oh, bummer.
Anyway.
That's okay, we move.
But yes, this is all I wanted to say in regards to the garment. So when Nick talks about the child, I think about a child like if you have to change a child's diaper or something like that, and not to make it seem perverse or anything like that, but that little kid does not care if it has clothes on or not. And then you have to fuss at the child like, don't run around like that. Like, come here, keep your dress down. Things like that or whatever. But it's just that uninhibited, this is me type deal, and actually accepting who you are.
But that's also, when you speak of the portions of the body that are covered, that we're uncomfortable with, that they are primarily those areas of intercourse.
Yeah,
So-
and then and now that you say that, it also makes me wonder as well. With that being so taboo, and I'm not saying at all, please do not look at it as I'm saying it is wrong to walk around with clothes or anything like that. I can see how with religion and making those sexual intercourse things so taboo, how it probably or has caused more problems or than anything because of so much confusion and people not being able to accept certain parts of themselves, or certain aspects of themselves have been demonized, so they think it's bad, etc. They don't see the God-like attributes in them.
So when we talk about the whole idea of intercourse, then that appears to be the major barrier. When we break down those barriers that we have been taught, because we have been taught the whole idea of this, and I don't want to use the word, but I can't think of another one. This whole idea of covering ourselves in false morality is a spiritual way of is a spiritual essence of covering ourselves with physical clothes. So when those walls are broken down based upon understanding and the desire, as Nick said a few minutes ago, to be in intercourse with the source, so that we can realize that we are the source and the source is us. But that doesn't happen until we get beyond this idea of intercourse.
Yeah, even with the situation with Jesus never have had intercourse, so that automatically eliminates all of humankind from being like him.
Yeah.
And automatically makes you a filthy rag as well. So.
But I think it's interesting that we still have among us, so a lot of this is, we're necessarily speaking from a perspective of our own culture and the development of our Judeo-Christian ethics, whatever you want to call them, because you have all around you, if you watch any National Geographic special or read any National Geographic since the 60s, there's still cultures that flourish. We were just watching something on Indonesia, I guess. I think it was Indonesia, the other night, where they were talking about kids. And at least to a certain age, there's just a freedom to let the child be joyous about being a child. And so little boys and little girls are jumping in and out of the water and all that kind of stuff, and there's not the slightest sense of any need to, whatever you want to call it, preach, teach, admonish, or establish distinctions and barriers, because at least traditionally until puberty, there wasn't any sense of separation. The overriding thing was, it's a very Montessori characteristic too, I think, to develop a
everyone, if you can still hear me at all, the sound coming from your microphone is very, very distorted. Like it sounds like a white noise on a TV.
Okay.
And I can't hear anyone speak, actually. You're back.
Okay.
Really?
You right?
That was quick, or something.
Okay.
Alrighty.
Then based upon, Richard talked about the innocence involved with the children, unless you come back to the children, so that the innocence is there, right? Is no accident, or there's no coincidence, I should say, that we are engaged in this culture in the battle with female reproductive system. Yeah, it's every day that's in the news. So maybe, just maybe, we're at this point where the Creator's saying, this is in your face in terms of intercourse, in terms of shedding the garments. This is in your face. Deal with it. Deal with it. Maybe that's where we are at this point. Not maybe, I believe that's where we are at this point, brother.
Nick, something you said earlier was that when we get to the point where we strip away all of these attitudes, etc., that we created about how we define ourselves, you said that once we do that, it almost mimics a mental breakdown, in a sense, from the the psychological perspective. But then what I was thinking about is, in the Bible when it talks about a broken and a contrite spirit, that's at a time when you then you're very vulnerable, like the unclothing, taking off your clothing. Until you get to that point, you feel vulnerable to take off certain aspects of your clothing. But it's at that time when you can be at the point of vulnerability that you can be open then to other things. And that's what you mean by the freedom of not being encumbered by all these things that have weighed us down, that we've defined and created for ourselves. Is that similar to what you were talking about?
Yes, absolutely.
Right.
The place where we have our greatest strength, in terms of in general, most people, the place where our greatest strength lies is actually in the one place that we are most afraid to go. Or rather, I'll say most people have no desire to go, because that desire has not yet become part of their experience. So the ones who are the called out ones that are referred to in the New Testament, and the elect are the ones who recognize that desire to go in and find out what all this is about, who and what they are, and what that means, and how they can apply that. And it very much is like a psychological breakdown. You have to be broken down to get to the base, so you can build the base up, so you can never be broken down again. Because if you deal with the root and deal with the source, then that's it. There's no lower, quote unquote, you can go than that. And it refers to anything that we use to artificially build up whom we are, that is not the result of our experience of whom we are as conscious beings. And the source of that conscious awareness. It is, I'm a brother, I'm a mother, I'm a student, I got all this stuff, and that is how I would define myself. Because that is how the intellectual mind or the material mind can only define itself, by what is material. So when you begin to, on an eternal level, start thinking, wait, that's stuff I possess, but that's not me. That can be a frightening process, because if you only ever define yourself by your things, or your attitudes, or your goals in life, or whatever it is, anything that is one step removed from you as an identity is something that you have to examine, something that we have to learn to set aside in order to focus our attention on the direct being that we are and that we possess. So, a lot of times when thoughts arise that cause us to go seeking in a new direction physically, we have to put those in check and recognize where they're coming from and whether or not they're actually going to put us in a position that will allow us to experience ourselves spiritually, more or less. Think of an example. Actually, let me go to the last part of that, and then I'll come back. So the last part of the same saying is, after you strip off your garments and place them beneath your feet like children, then you will see the Son of the Living One, and you will not be afraid. So, then you will see the Son of the Living One, and you will not be afraid. So, having gone through this process, having been brought to the place where you're able to become aware of who what you are as an identity in terms of your experience, rather than how we've attempted to define that identity, then you will be able to get to that core, that root, that source, or that base, and not be afraid of being broken any further. Once,
But when I see
When
this,
you-
when I see that though, will I not also recognize that the Son of the Living One and I are one?
yes,
And I won't be afraid to count
Sure.
myself as equal to or whatever, all of this other stuff we say. That we are one. If we came from the Creator, I'm part of the, I am what my source is.
yes.
I have the
And
characteristics of
I
my
got you.
source.
Sheldon, let me just add, you can't recognize it until you see it in yourself. Because if all you see is this physical thing, then you don't see at all. So until you make contact with it in you, you can't see anything in the true sense of what the word see actually means. Sheldon, you got something?
Oh yes, I was just going to say that seeing that is actually in your vulnerability when you become vulnerable. So your optimal, when Nick was speaking earlier today about freedom, your optimal freedom lies in your comfort of your extreme vulnerability. And it's in that vulnerability that you allow yourself to get down to. That is when you allow that you and the Son and God are all one in the same. But you have to get to the point of that vulnerability to actually realize that and feel that and, I guess, experience your true self.
But we, in order to do that, we have to look beyond the rules that were set for the institutionalization of what we call Christianity, as opposed to it being spiritual and us being not being human. Because I think the rules that were set to institutionalize it are the same things that keeps us being human. It keeps us from actually stripping ourselves. And when we think about it, it's not that people who we call non-Christian or outside of the realm of belief or atheists or whatever, that's not it. It's the one who profess to be seeking the light that keeps everyone else in bondage by virtue of this institutionalized religion.
Well, but I think all you're saying is, well, not all you're saying, but I think what you're saying is, and we've discussed it any number of ways, and I think Nick's saying it again, is it's only your journey and it's your sense of what's true. And I think what was running through my mind when we were talking about this is the myriad of solutions that are out there for you. Whether it's AA, whether it's some guy who is very charismatic and everybody suddenly starts going to hear he or she talk, etc., or it's in your local community where it's probably more difficult to break, to find that space to feel your own feelings because of all those social connections. You don't want to be different, it's hard to be different, people are pressuring you to be the same. So, but I think we've said that it's ultimately your own journey any way you cut it. The difficulty is in knowing how to appreciate the input you get from others, but then to tell yourself, okay, but let me assimilate that, let me deal with that. Don't tell me how I should conclude everything you're telling me, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
I mean,
I
I
think it's bigger than that, Richard. In that, the idea of is my journey is no different than looking for messianic consciousness. That's why it doesn't come, because we're always looking for it. But when we begin to realize it's not my journey, it's not your journey, it is the journey, and the journey is ours. Regardless of how we appear to be individuals, we're not. So when we wrap our minds around the whole concept of not mine or me or yours, it is oneness, it is unicity. That expression in itself breaks down the barriers that has a tendency to separate us by virtue of us talking about, what's mine and what's yours. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but that's part of the journey. And where do you start?
That is the journey.
Everybody starts from a different place, so to speak. So the concept of self, your concept of self and mine, could or should necessarily be different. The fact that you have this expression, all of the paths lead to the top of the mountain.
And I'm saying the concept of self is not different. Because the thing that makes the concept of self different is seeing self from a material perspective. But to see self from a spiritual perspective makes self the same for everyone. Because self is indeed spiritual. Without any identifying labels or tags, self is spiritual. It is not what I do every day or how I perceive it. It is what it is.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think the difference in what I'm saying and you're saying is you're talking about the top of the mountain and I'm talking about the perception of oneself in that journey, which would change. I can hear that just as well as I can hear a reading of scripture and tell me what I should believe of it. But what I do believe of it depends on where I am. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
I can tell you I believe it. I can mouth the right things, so to speak, back to you. But the bottom line is, what do I actually, I guess the word would be feel, in the privacy of my own existence, and that's.
So, I think the shift, which is not to the bottom of the mountain or the top of the mountain, the shift is within this room. In this room, everything exists. Outside of it, nothing exists in terms of material. If in this room, we could wrap our mind around the whole concept of spiritual unicity without even considering the individual self, then that in itself would spark a change or a sense of awareness beyond this room. As in, when we talk of things, we hear them other places because it's been put in the atmosphere. So when we in this room put this in the atmosphere, the idea that there is no such thing as an individual spiritual journey is a oneness of the spiritual journey. And because I believe that we have to approach this as if no one else in the world knows what we know or see what we see. Because that in itself keeps us on our toes. But if you begin to start thinking that when there's someone else in the world, we'll let them do it, as opposed to just dealing with it in this room. Do you understand what I'm trying to say?
Yeah. The hive and one of the
If the hive, even the hive is one mind.
right.
It's just one mind. And the mind of the hive is not the individual bees. The mind of the hives you can't see, but it exists. So in a sense, it's spiritual. That I guess that's what I'm trying to. That's more.
It's like the Star Trek Borg.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Or it's like all the cells in your body.
Yeah,
If you
they make one.
Yeah.
cut it into a billion pieces, you can't find the thing that makes it, or makes us conscious. And yet when you get a certain amount of them together, they produce what we will call like sentient or human consciousness experience. And it's when they've come together to produce that experience, or rather when they come together to be able to receive that experience, that singular experience begins to direct everything else for the good of everything else. And by virtue of the fact that we are also participants in this physical world, or by virtue of the fact that we also have to eat, and in order to eat, something else has to die, we can't really ignore the fact that we are not here by ourselves. Does that make sense? Does that make sense? Anyway?
It does.
Okay. And your video is out, but can everybody still see me and Sheldon?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Okay.
Do you want us to call you back so you can see us?
That's fine, as long as you can see me. If I put something up on the screen, anyway.
Pretty much the same.
So let's see. So
We wasn't
This is the-
anyway.
this is the process that we're in, the thing that we're trying to accomplish. So one of the things I was thinking back when Sheldon mentioned babies and children, for a long time, and it's probably just my personality, but it's something that's presented to me that I recognize that I can deal with appropriately. So when I'm sure it happens to everybody at some point, but when I'm tired and I don't want to be like disturbed, or like when I hear a baby crying on the metro or on the bus or wherever, oh, especially in an airplane, you can't leave. Feel, if you get frustrated or you get annoyed, feel that frustration and feel that annoyance. And understand that that is exactly how your own higher self regards you. While we are in this state of ignorance.
Whining.
Wow.
Whining, crying, I don't want anything to deal with you.
Wow.
Okay,
And-
we can go home now,
What-
meditate on that.
Absolutely.
But I use this as an example because that was one of the things that really
Wow.
gave me more insight into how to actually go about this. So when I felt that, I was like, wait a minute. My own annoyance, my own frustration or whatever is entirely a product of myself. It's like a unconscious reaction to it almost that I have almost lost control of because I just do it so much. So what I realized that I had to do, and what I realized that we all could do when we're faced with anything like this, was to, even though you feel it, say, wait, okay, that's not how I'm going to continue on in terms of how I respond to this situation. And just let my frustration and annoyance go. And in so doing, transform yourself into something that your own higher self wants to be attracted to. Because it is our tendency to create frustration and annoyance and all that stuff that is unattractive. That is a disturbance, that is a blockage, that is something that is not attractive to anything spiritual. So the next time that happens, recognize what you're seeing. You're seeing a mirror on the outside of you of what is internal. As above, so below. And learn to let your thoughts and emotions flow, which is something that Pastor Richard told me that was a huge help. See, the how-to is really how to stop doing what we normally do, which is produce blockages and thoughts that are that impede the flow from our source, and then B, oh, your video's back, and then B, I lost my train of thought. So A, we produce those thoughts in the first place, and then B, we latch onto them and don't let them go. So it's very Buddhist. They would say it's like you have to sit on the bank of a river and watch your thoughts float by. And sooner or later you will ignore those thoughts and focus on what comes before, by simply where you are learning to direct your attention. So what we're trying to do is make, it's kind of like, this is where I wanted to draw something, but it's kind of like you have there's just an energy flow, and you put something up in front of it, and it is either clear or it is opaque. If it's opaque, then it creates this blockage and it creates internal chaos. If it's clear, then the energy moves through it and you can move closer to the source of where that energy is coming from. Now, if that didn't make any sense, think about it in terms of your own thought. When you think, you are going through a process that ends up producing a particular thought or even an emotion, or whatever it is that pops into your head. So, depending on the thoughts and the emotions that you create, you can either become more aware of that process, or you can get lost in the things that you create. You can get lost in the anger, in the frustration, in the annoyance, in the whatever. If you, rather than engage those things that you create, you observe them as things floating alongside you in the river, you can gain more control over how you respond to them and make that response one that is conducive to getting at what is behind that. Does any of that make sense?
It
Or
does.
does it follow?
Yes, yeah.
It's the same as creating space. Creating space to allow wisdom to continue to flow. When you create space, the stepping back, in a sense, is what I thought about, and observing prevents you from reacting immediately, and creates space so that the flow can occur.
Yeah.
That's also about the first two lines in the prayer that Jesus taught, that we call the Lord's Prayer.
Mm-hmm.
Is creating that space so that the principles, which is kingdom, can flow in as those other things, you allow those other things to flow out. So the whole concept of kingdom and the prayer and let not your heart be troubled, John 14, all those things in my Father's house are many mansions, all those things are talking about this, creating the space by virtue of letting those other things flow out and focusing on the light. I'm done. I think.
Oh, I was thinking of what I was going to say.
Oh, okay.
So let's see.
You can vibrate. That's energy vibrating.
Is that what it is?
Yeah.
So, with regards to what I just said about the baby, let me put this up. It should come up in a few seconds, but
It's easier with a baby than a grown adult.
you know what? Let me find out what number this saying is, because I didn't
Thank
write it down.
you. Yes.
One who wants to know, right?
Yeah, I want to look at it.
Yeah.
Go back and read it again and meditate.
Which one is this? Usually it's the first result in the Google search. Anyway, can everybody see that?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. So recognize what is in your sight, and that which is hidden from you will become plain to you. For there is nothing hidden that will not become manifest. So I just gave the example of recognizing what is happening when you come into a situation that causes us to generate all these feelings of annoyance, negativity, anger, whatever. If you instead change your attitude towards it and change the way you think about it, recognize it for an experience that is being presented to you to bring something out of you that you need to deal with or learn how to properly deal with, then the thing that is hidden from you, which is your inner self that we are in pursuit of, will become plain to you. It will become easier to see, easier to feel, easier to work with. Does that make sense?
Isn't that the same thing as just living in the present, in the moment?
It's very similar, and actually, yeah, it probably is the same thing, because if you live in the present, you're here in the now, which is the center.
Right.
And we are in search of our center, because everything issues forth from it, including all that anger and frustration and whatever. And those are just common examples. So, everything that says live in the now, center yourself, center yourself, live in the now, all of that is, and what's the word? Admonishment? Biggest word I use all day. That's, and it's somebody saying, this is what you have to do in order to know what I know. And I know you can know it because I am you.
Yes.
That's it. So, I'll come back to that center of yourself thing as well. But so I forget. There's somebody. Has everyone heard of somebody called Greg Braden? I know, Dad, you have. But I'm not sure where he got it. But there's something he calls the Essene mirrors. Essentially, he's talking about teachings that were passed down from the Essenes. But they basically state that whatever situation you encounter, whatever you're presented with, is something that's reflecting something in you. If you don't like what you see, and if you feel yourself, you feel in yourself dislike, then that is what is being reflected by that experience. And when you see it, or when you feel it rather, when you recognize it inside of you, that is a call to deal with it properly. And the way that you deal with it is to simply observe it, instead of to engage it, or to run away with it, and to get caught up in the delusion that it is.
Nick, back up, please. When you observe it rather than engage it, that needs to sink in. But because by virtue of engaging it, we have a tendency to label it, and it becomes something totally different than what it actually is. And it doesn't change the it, but it changes the it as we perceive it. So it just allow it to be. Don't engage it by thought. Don't engage it by trying to identify it or explain it.
Right.
Well, I think the trick is, I won't take you back into that, but I can remember all the old jiu-jitsu stuff that I used to bore you all with. It's the same. The thing we used to say in jiu-jitsu was, if somebody grabs you, who has who? It all depends, and it's a question for which there's no answer. Is he holding you, or do you have him? Because now he's bound by his contact you. So everything that you attach to sticks, and there's a stickiness to it. So we're talking about, how do you not get stuck? So it's not necessarily, and I'm not saying it in a bad way, it's not necessarily something simple or easy to do. You can do it in moments.
Yeah.
But you can sit down and paint a Picasso, but never know how and why you came to paint it or do it twice. So just to have the moment is I think, an encouragement, but it doesn't mean you're necessarily somewhere. You know what I'm saying? Because if you want to ultimately have a sense of, maybe, I don't know if control is the right word, the circumstance, how you react to the circumstance, there's a certain discipline or a practice that comes with that, which eventually, just like the techniques in a martial art, become intuitive. When you're a black belt in a martial art, you know 150 techniques, but more importantly, that's considered your point of beginning in the art. And it would be the same with scripture, I think. Because now from here on out, you're supposed to forget all those techniques and just employ what you've intuitively understood, because every one of us is unique. No one's going to do the same thing the same way. You know what I'm saying? And that's something that, it's an east-west kind of thing, traditionally.
Let me jump in here and add onto what you just said. That is the meaning of I am here to fulfill the law.
I'm here to do what?
Fulfill the law.
Oh,
Audrey, okay, Sheldon and Audrey had their hand up.
Oh, the only thing I was going to say was that you see everything that you see through the eyes of what is actually in you, which well basically goes to what Nick was saying a little while ago.
Audrey?
I'd say that differently.
I see that in the sense of when Nick says observe rather than engage. I see that as when we engage, what we're doing is not only are we wrapping ourselves in our garments, but we're taking some of our garment and wrapping that other thing in it too, so that we see it in terms of how we perceive things, and then we want to mold it in terms of how we perceive things, as opposed to just not letting it be ungarmented too, so to speak.
Institutionalized religion, that's what it is.
Well, we have an expression like, you want to have a purposeful life. So act with purpose, right? It doesn't mean a decision you make in your head. It has to come from an intuitive, we say higher self, wrap all those words together, level, which means the understanding has to be there. The openness for that communication has to be there. Otherwise it's forced. But it's a purposeful act. It's a purposeful reaction. It's a purposeful something. Nick's talking about how you can get to that, as opposed to losing control. Oh, I didn't, I went off, right?
Yeah, but the purpose, you don't mean the purpose is to mold it or change it. You mean the purpose is so that you can learn to be unencumbered by it.
Well, there's another expression that what we can detachedly observe, we can control. So if you can control in that sense, you can react to it in a purposeful way, meaning the way you really intend to react to it, as opposed to, tell that kid to shut up, and then it came out of your mouth before you knew it, or whatever, and now you're off into all that turbulence.
And that's why I suppose you're supposed to become it by virtue of knowing, you mentioned the martial arts, by virtue of knowing all those moves and knowing that you ought to think about them, you ought to just respond. That means that the moves are you and you're the moves. So you actually become the it. So you don't have to think about the response. And so the wrong thing doesn't fall out of your mouth. And the reason the wrong thing falls out of our mouth is because of who we are. Goes back to what Sheldon said, seeing things through what's in us. And the idea is to have all those things that clothe us in the garments flow out so we can be who we are. of what we were created to be. Is that, help me somebody.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we in a sense become, we don't let those things encumber us. We
Right.
just-
Step out, just be.
Yeah,
And
Then we right back
say
on
it so many
board.
times we think it's that simple, but yeah.
Yes, the people or things that we exercise any power or control over, we cannot avoid those same things or people actually having power and control over us.
Yeah, because it takes it's a communication, it's a two-way relationship, right?
it has to.
So if I'm gonna dominate you, in a way, you're dominating me.
And,
I mean, there's a dance going on here.
Yes, because I'm taking all your attention and energy, yes.
That's right. Which is sometimes somebody's tactic.
but then,
Right.
that's why, that's the reason, in the beginning, there was nothing said about dominating man. It was the consciousness that needed to be dominated, as opposed to individuals. But created individuals began with Nimrod. There was a desire to dominate individuals, and we are still at that point now. And more importantly, I think that we are at that place where we begin to recognize the one thing that we have dominated and has kept us in the really, really weak is females, the feminine energy. Being dominated, ignored, or pushed to the side is what has actually put us in a place of weakness when it comes to actually realizing who we are. So we got this thing of domination all messed up. And even with our leadership in congregations now, with institutionalized religion, those in the pulpit dominate those in the pews. So that has to change, so that when we begin to see that there is no domination of each other, then we're beginning to accept the concept of the oneness of us all. Right now, the Creator has put us in a position to accept the oneness of us all by virtue of having Nick is a part of my mind, I'm a part of Nick's mind. Our minds are the same. But in order for me to accept that, Nick does something that I'm not able to do, and that is what he's teaching now. I don't see that, but I saw what I saw last week, and he didn't see that. But that's just another portion of and I use the word mind very loosely. Recognizing rather that is one, and if I can't accept what he sees that I don't see, then I am putting a barrier between him and me. Does that make sense? Yeah. So that's the beginning of accepting the oneness of it all.
I wouldn't say, don't say you're using the mind very loosely, say very large, in a large sense. Loose is kind of casual, flippant. No, you're not. It's in the bigger, more profound sense of mind. Yeah.
Thank you, sir.
Well,
I'm gonna give you a point. But really, you're right, it is it's a larger sense of mind.
for the collective.
Yeah, all.
This is so Buddhist.
So I think if there's one thing that I would hope that you take away from whatever it is I'm speaking about today is just only that in order to begin the process of truly learning how to work consciously with the internal movements of will and all the desires and the urges that you have that produce thought and action, is only to observe them at the point you become aware of them. So when you become aware of them, they are presented to you. And instead of engaging them, as we just said, observe them first. And when you observe them, you leave yourself open to, or you create a space for, and you leave yourself open to be receptive to the influence from your own higher self or your spirit. which then informs how you respond to that thing. But the first step is to just hold it in a place of observation first. So, doesn't matter what it is. Thought pops into your head all the time. You're forced to make decisions all the time. Anything that is pressing on your conscious awareness, you can treat it the same way. And if you don't know what to do, just make a decision with the intent to learn from, as we said before. And always with the intent of feeling for that influence of what is deeper in you than the thought or the emotion itself that has been presented to you. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I think the idea of thoughts popped in your head, and the head is supposed to be the symbol of authority. So whatever thought pops in your head, it comes under your authority. You deal with it the way, if you deal with it the way you should, then it becomes enlightenment. If you make it something that it was never intended to be, it becomes confusion. If you don't know what to do with it, leave it alone. And it will help you to be who you are.
And going off what you just said, here, let me add to the, what if the whole purpose we were here is to bring to order all the chaos that was created in the beginning?
I don't think that's a what if. I think that's the reason we are here.
So what that means is divinity inserted itself into the space it created for the purpose of bringing to order the chaos that was left in its place when it left, quote unquote.
Yeah.
Which
But
means
itself is me though. When you say
Yes.
divinity inserted itself, that's
you. Yeah.
us.
Us. Yeah.
yes,
Yes. Yes.
which means that those thoughts that occur to you are citizens of the kingdom presenting themselves to the king for judgment.
Right. And you know, when I think about it, Nick,
Oh, let me get
regardless
that.
of the culture, when they look at spiritual things, it's the light coming out of the darkness. When they look at a higher being or a creator, it's always the light coming out of the darkness. In other words, the darkness or the chaos coming first. And the light coming from it, because the purpose of that chaos is to be brought to order by the divinity that's inserted in it.
Yeah.
I don't know, well, we can talk about it later. Maybe I'm just
I was gonna say king or queen, if anybody was one. It doesn't matter. It's
I
not
took
you.
that generically, thank you
Yeah.
very much. They are one.
Yeah.
It's both.
Yeah.
And they're more than the sum of their parts.
That's okay.
Now, I guess I'm a little more Jewish today. I want to argue. I don't think that's it. I think, no, if it's a dream, if it's a grand illusion, if it's a game, but the most serious and only game there is, then there's another purpose. The order is to reveal what's behind the chaos, and to be one with that again. So I go back to, and I can't say it properly. We've said it here before, I think it was in here, that why did God, I won't say Ein Sof, whatever, what create the space, create all this, allow the chaos? Somewhere, one time or another, before we were saying to better know, and I don't use this in the wrong sense, himself. If you're the creator of everything, it can be a little boring, so maybe create some space, allow some chaos, allow a self-awareness to keep maturing, evolving, or growing in your self-awareness. I can't use the words because how do you talk about something that is everything being more self-aware? You know what I'm saying? But we have discussed that before, so that, my sense is that's what's behind this.
I think that my perspective on that is we will never know purpose, beginning purpose, until we deal with the chaos. Because the chaos came before there was a clear purpose. And suppose for a moment that it is impossible for anyone to know the purpose for our being or for the constriction taking place until after order has been brought to this chaos, and we see something totally different or totally beyond our realm of thought, or that constitutes the purpose for which we exist. The reason the chaos has to be brought.
But I guess I'm just, again, to be kind of provocative, not meaning to be, but it's just what's happening, what's dancing around. The idea of order is, to me, another word for self-awareness. And if the self-awareness is there, there's automatically, by definition, order. In which case, it's not a triumph over chaos. Chaos just disappears, because the illusion was the chaos.
And that's it. No, I'm not saying.
So the question is, why the exercise? But that's the question we've been asking since the beginning.
And I'm
Why
saying,
go through all this?
and I'm saying that
And that,
in this room, if we dissipate, if we overcome, if we bring order, if we bring light, if we move beyond the chaos, then it brings humanity beyond the chaos. That's what I'm saying. It brings humanity, regardless of where we perceive someone being human, be it in China or be it in this room. Once we do that in terms of total recognition, acceptance, wrapping our mind around, embracing the essence of who we really are, it brings the whole of mankind there. That's what I'm saying.
And exactly. So I think we have to go through this exercise, quote unquote, because we're not the only ones here. And let me say, the best way to learn how to be a king or a queen is to do what a king or a queen does. So here we are in this experience, emulating what our source or our creator already knows how to do in full. But creation being what it is, it cannot do it itself unless it possesses a certain level of conscious awareness of its connection to source to be able to respond to source's influence and bring chaos to order. So in other words, we are here to do for the other beings that are also here what they cannot.
Yes.
And through that process, learn what it means to be who or we are, while doing something similar for them. John?
Oh, yes. So learning who we are or accepting who we are is actually also accepting the chaos, and it is in accepting the chaos that chaos ceases to be chaos.
Okay.
Chaos is only that which has not been ordered, is it not?
That we don't understand.
or understood.
That which has not been ordered from some perspective, whether it's my own internal perspective or whether it's on a larger macro type perspective. That's okay. That's all it is.
It's those same things that we were talking about earlier that we cover ourselves up with garments that we have not accepted, because anything that you want to hide, you haven't accepted it.
Yeah.
Yep.
Oh yeah, that's it.
That's it.
Yep, it's too easy to say yep.
Yep. That's it.
Yep.
You want to pick up here next week then?
Yeah, I kind of do. I kind of want to. That's not what I say. I actually did want to get into the. At the beginning, I mentioned Lucifer. I did want to get into that.
Who?
But
Can you consider saying number 70 for next week too?
number 70.
Please, yes. For next week.
That's your homework.
Okay.
That was saying number 5 that you ended with.
Yeah. The same.
Okay.
Wow.
So I think I'm gonna stop. I want to stop going too much further today. Does anybody have any questions or anything at all
Good lesson.
that we need to resolve before we go?
Just be sure you look both. Be sure you look both ways when you're walking down in the intersection when you're absorbed in these thoughts.
What were you saying, Richard?
Not that I was just joking that, because I was thinking a little bit earlier why you go on a retreat, why you go away. To create a certain safeness that allows you to process some of this, because otherwise, I mean, life, the realities of the life we've constructed are all around you, and it can be very challenging and difficult to stay on that course while you're in the midst. You know, the sort of humorous thing used to be, it's easy to go to the top of the mountain and find enlightenment. The hard place to maintain it is in the middle of a traffic jam in Manhattan at rush hour. But the other side of that is don't step out in the middle of the traffic while your mind is thinking the other. I mean, you have to sort of balance. That's the hard part. That's how we wind up putting everything in the box of do it all on Sunday. Right? When in fact...
Well, let me add to that, it's difficult because we think about it, and you have to think about it a little bit in order to get at the being it, but the goal is not thinking about it.
But you have to pass through that, you know that. That's the Zen koan thing. You've got to challenge yourself 1,000 different ways until you let go of that. Right?
Well, the purpose, yeah, well, until you let go of your desire to engage intellectualness.
Yeah.
But it's the desire that's the real thing you have to recognize and then let go of. So even all the things we talked about today, those are also thoughts that I've put in your head. But those, you can let those go too. That doesn't mean you forget them. It also, it means don't be consumed by them.
Well, I think this is the essence of what? The saying of the
Allow
Buddha,
yourself to absorb them, rather.
well, or the saying of the Buddha that the real culprit is desire. It's not the desire for X, Y, or Z. It's not the desire for truth. It's not the truth that's good and desire for wrong that's bad. It's the desire that's the root of the problem. Because it makes you go in a certain direction, so you're only going in a linear way instead of being 360 degrees expansive, if you want to think of an analogy. Pretty crude one, but still.
Well, desire is just another tool. And if you haven't harnessed it or you're kind of ignoring it, then yeah, you're subject to, I don't know, whims that you're not even aware of.
Yeah, so the thing is to examine your desires.
Be purposeful about them.
Yeah, why? What are they? Who controls who? Why do you have them? They're trying to tell you. And that's why in the usual gymnastics that you hear in Buddhism, you have to let go of the desires. And it sounds like that means you're going to be just a wet cloth lying on the floor. person without desire, what the heck kind of,
So, when you're on your way home and somebody cuts you off, think about those crying babies.
Okay. That's good lesson. That's a good lesson. Did you hear that?
And the truth of the light that we are, and the light of truth that we are, has us to know that we have the power to remove physical barriers, mental barriers, emotional barriers, any barrier of our own ego-constructed creative minds, and open ourselves to the flow from our higher self. Amen.
Okay. Any